IGEPHA im Gespräch. Der Podcast der Austrian Self Care Association.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of IGEPHA im Gespräch, the podcast of the Austrian Self Care Association. I'm Christina Nageler, the Executive Director of IGEPHA. In our current podcast season, we'll dive into artificial intelligence, exploring the opportunities and challenges innovative technologies present for the self-care industry. Artificial intelligence has long been used in medical diagnostics, and wearables like fitness trackers and health apps are widespread among the public. A new chapter began with the public introduction of AI systems like ChatGPT. Trustworthy AI application can support individuals in self-care, potentially revealing the capacities of healthcare systems. My guest today is Will Jackson, Head of API Management and Platform Engineering at NHS Digital. He specializes in application programming interfaces and works for the UK's National Health Service. The NHS refers to the public healthcare system in the United Kingdom. The NHS provides medical care for approximately 65.5 million people. Every 24 hours, the NHS treats nearly 1 million patients. With 1.7 million employees, the organization is the fifth largest employer in the world. Welcome, Will. Thanks to have you on our podcast.
Thank you for having me, Christina. Looking forward to it.
Before we dive into APIs, let me briefly introduce my guest. Will Jackson has been leading API management and platform engineering at NHS since December 2022. Prior to this, he was involved in API engineering at Barclays, a British bank. Will Jackson studied business management, among other subjects, at the University of Leeds. My first question, Will, could you start explaining what application programming interfaces are and why APIs are of interest in the context of artificial intelligence? And could you illustrate the benefits with practical examples, because our audience is not too much into APIs yet. We want to change that.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So application programming interfaces, which, as you mentioned, are commonly known as APIs. Simply put, they are ways of connecting two or more computer programs or components. So you can see them as kind of like an intermediary or a middleman, for example. So if you picture kind of a tube connecting two things, that is essentially what APIs do. So they have normally kind of a standard set of definitions or protocols. So everything's kind of written in a consistent way, which is really important in APIs because it allows kind of integration. And that standardization allows things to talk to each other a lot more easily. So when you work in APIs, one word that you hear a lot is certainly, which is a bit of a crazy word, to be honest, is interoperability. And the point of interoperability is allowing multiple different sources to all be connected and talking to each other. So historically, this has been a massive challenge because you'd have one component or application built in one way over here and another built in a completely different way over here. And people wouldn't understand how we could get these talking together. And it would take a lot of time and effort. And then once you do it once here, you then have to do it again a completely different way over here. APIs provide a standardization where you can have a consistent structure, which will allow you to do that integration in many different ways between different points. So APIs are kind of really important in that integration journey. They're also very important from an artificial intelligence perspective, because artificial intelligence as a concept is kind of, the value is derived from it in the amount of data that these large language modules and AIs can consume. So they have to be able to consume huge amounts of data to make them as intelligent as possible. And they need that standardization of that data to allow them to be able to comprehend it and understand it. So a lot of the kind of artificial intelligence that we see available for consumers, such as ChatGPT is a really good example. A lot of ChatGPT is powered by artificial intelligence because it's not a pre-programmed response that you're getting from that AI bot. It uses kind of advanced natural language processing and machine learning to be able to tweak its responses based on who it's talking to. And the reason it's able to do that is because it's using APIs in the background to help it kind of glean that knowledge. So that's kind of one example of how APIs are kind of important in the AI landscape. A really, really simple example of APIs that you may kind of interact with frequently is if you've got an app that you use for checking the weather, for example, that app that you open to see, what's the weather going to be like today, as we were just discussing. You don't really need to check in England because it's always raining. But in Austria, you might need to check. So the app will talk directly to the kind of meteorological hub that has the right information. It'll pick the latest information real time, and then it will display that into your app. So the connectivity between the app on your phone and the ultimate data source, the canonical data source, will be connected via an API. So I think, that's a clear use case. A lot of chatbots that you see today are kind of really APIs are an integral part of. So going back to these AIs being able to be really specific in the knowledge they have. So, for example, I was looking at leasing a car recently, and there's a chatbot which allows you to kind of help with that. So that is really kind of specific, subject matter expert knowledge that chatbot understands, and it has real-time information about the lease deals that are available. All that information that's being fed into that bot is coming via API connections. So it's central to that data access and integration of AI. It helps make it operational in the real world, as in APIs do, because it helps companies expose it. And it also does a lot of the more kind of, I guess, what you'd consider to be the more boring stuff, but is really important in AI because there's still an element of distrust with it because it's such a new technology. So APIs help with a lot of safeguarding of AI. They help with the governance and kind of monitoring of it as well. So some of those kind of more mundane tasks, it also allows to be brought to the forefront within AI.
Well, thanks for checking us into the topic and thanks for the really good example. Sometimes I have the feeling, though, with the weather app, somebody's sitting there and typing, not looking out of the window. But that's another story. And why did the NHS then dive into these APIs, and what new solutions were developed or did you develop, and who are these solutions then intended for? And what did external partners and stakeholders, what role did they play within your API platform? Yeah,
so there's quite a lot in that question, Christina, so just nudge me if I'm
sorry for that.
Yeah, no worries. They're all very good questions. So in terms of the why initially, so the National Health Service in England has a really, really rich data source. It has a lot of information on its population.
I just told the audience it's 75.5 million people that are within the NHS. That's
so the data
a
source,
lot.
Yeah, exactly. The data source is unbelievable, and we don't use it very well at all, and we don't share it very well at all. And I think the pandemic was a good insight into that, in terms of people when we had to be really reactive and do things super quickly, it became clear of this kind of gold mine of data that we were sat on and not really using effectively. So I think my job when I came into the NHS was very much driven by this amazing kind of breadth of data that we have. How do we make this more available to other parts of the health service, whether that be hospitals and GPs and pharmacies, or to the suppliers that help them become more kind of technically mature? How do we provide that information to those guys more easily to allow them to benefit from it? So I think that's why NHS went on such kind of a strong kind of API-led strategy from a tech perspective. And in terms of new solutions, Christina, that's an interesting one, because again, kind of, if you look at APIs kind of independently, they're more of like an enabler than anything that provides a service in itself. So again, it wasn't crazy, like mind-blowing new tech that we were doing with these APIs. A lot of it was just taking what we have today and making it more readily available to the masses. So a really good example of that from a self-care perspective is the NHS app. So all of the functionality within that app is powered by APIs, and it's information that we've always had, well, for tens of years, for decades we've had, but we haven't had the right vehicle to get it in front of our customers within the app. So things like I say, initially kind of COVID Pass was on there. You get access to your healthcare record. You can do online consultations through it. You can manage your prescriptions through it. You can book appointments. You can see test results. There's a relatively new feature around something called patient choice, which is if you get a referral, you can choose which kind of expert you're referred to based on kind of geographical location or preference. So all of that information is being collated by kind of APIs within the app. And I think it's, what we've been able to do from a self-care perspective by investing in APIs and investing in an API platform has been, really amazing. And then I think in terms of the role of externals, so it's a slightly strange landscape, Christina, not from a self-care perspective, but more from like a GP and pharmacist perspective. So we have not a lot of technology understanding in our end users, so our pharmacists and our GPs. We're getting a better tech understanding centrally in NHS, which is where I sit. So we have a dependency on suppliers that sit in the middle to kind of translate what we're doing and make it like viable and understandable for the end users. That's a bit of a model that we're trying to move away from, because inherently it means we're dependent on these guys in the middle, whereas we just want to talk to each other if we could. But right now we have quite a big burden on those kind of external partners and suppliers to help us get this information out and make it viable for our end users in their kind of day-to-day scenarios that they're supporting and the general population and people through.
I'm glad that the situation is the same in all the countries.
Yes, good. Yeah, I think everyone is struggling with the same problem for sure.
And what advantages does the NHS API platform offer, and what would you recommend to other healthcare systems? For example, for us in Austria, I mean, we have the ELGA, which has the data of all patients, so we are quite far in that, but we actually don't have an app. So how many downloads, for example, do you have? How many of these 65 million inhabitants have downloaded the app and use it regularly?
Yeah, so during the pandemic, your COVID pass was accessible via the app. So we got a huge amount of downloads because people couldn't go to restaurants, go for haircuts, etc., unless they had this information, go abroad on holiday. So, and that was really good actually, because it meant we had an amazing uptake of it. And then we get a few of those people, admittedly, have gone dormant since and stopped using it, but we still have a really good population that have actually been like now it's in front of them. They're like, oh, this is actually useful. I can send my prescription there instead of there, or I can reorder that, or I can do an online consultation. So that was definitely an advantage of the pandemic, was the amount of people who started interacting with the app who never would have done in a different scenario, which has allowed us to still have, I'd say, almost 2/3 of the population that are interacting with it kind of effectively. And I think, within that, in terms of what the advantages of a platform, the key one just has to be standardization, and that has to be kind of internally within the NHS and externally as well. So now we have a platform for any externals that are coming in and wanting to use NHS data. There is one point of entry, and whether they're getting, so let's take two APIs for an example, whether they're using our personal demographic service or whether they're using our bookings and referral service, they know the journey to get to those data sources will be identical. Whereas if you go back 5 years ago, they would have had to talk to one team over here who would have told them something completely different to the team over here. So that standardization is really important, but it's also important for us internally because it means we have a consistent way of building things. We have a consistent tech stack that when we need to do internal integrations, we're 80% of the way there before we start, because we're all building things consistently in the right way that are all hosted on our API platform. So it gives really good standardization from that perspective. It gives a really good kind of security model, which is something that people kind of can get behind and trust without any kind of hesitation. And again, that's standardized. And things like, again, that I've referred to as potentially the more boring stuff around monitoring of services, alerting when there's any issues, logging, which is basically just tracking to see for any issues. All of those kind of abilities come out the box with the API platform. So all of our services just get those kind of features by being hosted on our platform. So it offers a lot of benefits in terms of kind of security and resilience of service, and also that standardization, which is key in terms of how we do things within the NHS and how we are seen to be doing things externally. So it makes our services kind of much more easy for people to adopt. Because like I say, in the NHS, we've got loads of information. In terms of disseminating that and getting it out to people, we're quite often reliant on others. So we need to make it as easy as possible for them to integrate with us to spread that. I don't know how well this translates, but we have a saying in English where you say, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
Okay.
And it's almost like we are, with that platform and our API strategy, we are doing everything we can to make it as easy as possible for the horse to drink. So we're leading it there, we're encouraging it, and then we're trying to make it really easy for our suppliers to kind of benefit from the advantages of the platform as well.
So is this the recommendation you would give any other country to make it as easy as possible for the others?
Yeah.
To
the adoption is just so critical. And it seems like you're in a really similar situation, Christina, where you've got a good wealth of kind of enriched data. And it's how do we empower people to be able to use this data more broadly in the healthcare ecosystem so all of us can reap the reward from it.
What about data security?
Yeah, so again, that's something that the platform's really good at in terms of kind of access keys and credentials and security from that aspect. We have 4 key kind of access modes within the NHS, which the sensitivity of the data drives which access mode people use. And again, for our hardest access mode, everyone understands why they have to jump through those kind of set hoops to access that data, because it is kind of really sensitive personal information. But the way that the architecture and technology is structured, particularly with the platform supporting that, it gets people very comfortable very quickly with kind of the level of security we're putting in place.
So everybody was easily convinced that this system is secure, like politics, like customers?
We had to do a lot of conversations with Cabinet Office to make sure they were comfortable. I think one thing, so the core product we use, Christina, for our platform is a Google product called Apogee.
Okay.
So I think like the global footprint and the businesses that use that product and the credibility that product has from its position in multiple marketplaces across the world, I think certainly helped with that point, because then we're having conversations in Cabinet Office about X, Y, and Z are also using it. And, you know, these are the other companies that have super sensitive data, both in public and private sector, are using kind of this Google technology. So I think partnering with them to build that platform certainly helped with a lot of those conversations.
Okay. How will API development progress, and what further improvements for artificial intelligence applications can we expect, maybe also seen within the self-care sector? Do you see any future trends?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think in terms of APIs, I think, again, it goes back to that crazy word of interoperability. So the focus is definitely on how do we get different hospitals, different pharmacies, everyone communicating better together. Again, I don't think there's going to be anything that groundbreaking that APIs are particularly driving. It's just improving the integration of those disparate and siloed points across the healthcare landscape. AI will be very different, on the other hand. It will be a lot more kind of revolutionary, I think, over the next probably 5 to 10 years. And I think a lot of that will be within self-care specifically. So there'll be a lot of things around kind of diagnostic support. So whether that's like self-diagnosis and screening, and just general kind of, so there's a big push in the UK at the moment to use pharmacies more to kind of as a support net for self-serve, because there's a lot of countries, America do this a lot, where they spend a lot of time with their pharmacists to get advice on medications, etc. We're generally not very good at that in the UK. We tend to run straight to doctors whenever we feel ill and feel like we need something a bit more than self-care.
Yeah.
So there's a big...
It's even worse in Austria, so you are doing great.
So there's a big push to promote using kind of pharmacists as part of that self-care, Christina. And I think there's a lot of the information that pharmacists are being fed to support that self-care at the moment is coming through APIs, but there is an intention to use kind of AI to help promote initially those clinicians and those pharmacists, to give them more information in the context of what the patient's asking. Yeah. But ultimately to be able to provide that autonomously to customers. So they're talking to an AI bot which is powered via an LLM, which is listening specifically to where they're at and what they're thinking. And it's a continuous engagement as well. So it has historic information from previous conversations they had. And it's really supporting that self-care, because it's learning that individual and learning kind of how they react to things and how they understand things, and therefore what advice it needs to give them. So I do think there is huge potential for AI in healthcare and effectively removing a lot of that resource burden, which is hugely problematic, I think, in pretty much every country.
Well, thanks. I have one final question. How do you personally utilize artificial intelligence? Is there an application you can recommend? What, like a technician like you have a good recommendation for us, hopefully.
I tend to use it more in my personal life than professional. One app that I do use in my professional life, which is quite good, is something called ClickUp, which is a productivity and project management app. So it can do things like, so for example, from our conversation, it would generate a transcript out the back of this call, like Teams would do. It offers functionality like it can write a summary. So it'll take the transcript and it'll document a summary. It'll document kind of actions and tasks lists out of it. So it's all kind of AI driven to document all of this.
So you don't have to work.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it gives me more free time to spend with the children. And it has a good feature on whiteboards as well, where it's got a click whiteboards feature where you can do kind of brainstorming, and it'll take your brainstorming and it'll create a task list out of it, just kind of auto-generated. So that is quite cool. In a personal setting, there's one that isn't actually available in the UK at the moment, but I was just in the States over the weekend, and some of my friends have got this app. It's called Clio, CLEO, and it's a banking app, and it does kind of tailored financial insights and management. So it helps you track budgets, it helps you categorize your transactions, it helps you hit savings goals by setting up funding pots where it moves kind of money between. And obviously, with the kind of economic position we're in currently, in the exactly, and the cost of living just going through the roof, it's having stuff like that where AI is supporting people manage their finances better, I think is something that's really powerful. And then there's one called Gym Buddy as well, actually, which does personalized workout plans. So it'll do kind of workout plans that are tailored specifically to your fitness goals and your fitness level and your preference. So you feed it loads of information about kind of how you want to work out and when you want to work out, and it'll build you a workout scheduler. So it'll tell you when you should be doing it, and it'll build you the workout within that as well. So yeah, that's quite a cool app. It's quite interesting.
I had one of those. They don't help you if you don't want to do it.
That is true. Yeah, you still got to want to do it. That's generally what I do, Christina. I was like, oh yeah, that's a really good workout schedule, and then I don't do any of it. But at least I can see that the AI is working well.
Well, thank you, Will, so much for these insights into the world of APIs, and it was fascinating to learn more about the technical side of AI applications and APIs. Thanks a lot for your time. And
yeah, my pleasure. Lovely to meet you, Christina. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Bye.
Cheers.
AI will continue to be a focus in our next podcast episodes, and I'm looking forward to having our listeners join us again. IGEPHA is dedicated not only to these exciting topics, but also to many other aspects currently engaging the self-care industry in Austria. If you want to learn more about our services and training offerings, please feel free to email me at office@igepha.at. Thank you for joining this podcast episode, and see you soon for a new episode of IGEPHA im Gespräch.